You know those frustrating senior moments, forgetting a name, misplacing your keys? We all just kind of chalk it up to getting older. But what if a big part of it wasn't really about your brain, but about your neck? Yeah, let's dive into this really surprising connection. And that's the big question we're tackling. We're going to uncover this fascinating and honestly often overlooked cause of cognitive decline. And it all starts in a single, vital artery that's responsible for feeding your brain.
So our investigation here really starts with a rediscovery. See, the idea that an artery in your neck could affect how you think, it's not new. But it was a clue that was kind of lost for decades, only to pop back up as absolutely critical for understanding how our brains age.
Now, we're not talking about classic dementias like Alzheimer's, which you usually associate with memory loss. We're looking at something else called vascular cognitive impairment, or VCI. Think of it less like your brain's hard drive is failing to store memories, and more like its processor is just slowing down. It affects your ability to plan, to solve problems. And what's really key here is the difference between these two things. A neurologic deficit, that's obvious. You can't move your arm, for example. Everyone can see it. But a cognitive deficit, that is much, much sneakier. It's a problem with the whole system, like your ability to learn or reason. And that's exactly why VCI can creep up on you, getting worse for years without anyone really noticing.
And like I said, this isn't some brand new idea. Way back in 1951, a doctor named Fisher suggested this exact link. But pretty soon after, the medical world got super focused on preventing strokes, which, are also caused by this artery. So the whole connection to this more subtle cognitive decline just got put on the back burner. That is, until the 2000s, when suddenly the problem became too big to ignore.
So, this brings us right to the central mystery. How exactly does a blockage in the neck cause problems with our thinking? Well, researchers have zeroed in on two main theories. Okay, our first suspect is a chronic condition you can basically think of as brain starvation. The scientific name is hyperperfusion. This isn't a sudden thing. It's a slow, grinding process where the brain just isn't getting all the fuel it needs, day in and day out. Here's how it works. Plaque builds up, right? And it narrows the artery. Now, the brain has this amazing backup plumbing system. It's called the circle of Willis, and it tries to reroute the blood. But here's the kicker. In almost half of all people, that backup system has a flaw. It's incomplete. And when that happens, the system fails and parts of the brain are just consistently starved of the blood and oxygen they desperately need. This is honestly the perfect analogy for it. It's not a sudden event. It's that constant low-level frustration of a kinked hose that means the garden, or in this case, your brain, is just slowly withering over a long, long time. Our second suspect is a bit more direct, but it's also way stealthier. We're talking about a silent attack from tiny, tiny particles that break off from that plaque and travel straight into the brain. This is basically a death by 1,000 cuts scenario. The plaque isn't stable, so it sheds these little pieces, and these cause mini-strokes that are so small you don't even notice them. There's no weakness in your arm, no slurred speech, nothing. But over years and years, the damage from thousands of these tiny injuries starts to add up, and eventually it leads to a very real decline in your cognitive function.
Okay, so we have two very plausible theories. But what does the evidence actually say? Does the data back up this connection between a blockage in the neck and a problem in the brain? Let's take a look.
And here it is. This is our smoking gun. The chart shows a really clear, statistically significant difference. When you compare people with a narrowed carotid artery to a similar group of people without it, their rate of cognitive impairment is just dramatically higher. So the link, it's not just a theory. You can see it right there in the data. And the scale of this is just staggering. One key study found that about half, 50%, of all patients with this blockage who hadn't even had a stroke already had measurable impairment in at least two different areas of thinking. That's a huge number. And here's the really crucial part. Researchers controlled for all the other usual suspects, high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking. And even after you account for all of those things, the narrowed artery itself stood out as its own independent risk factor. That just makes the case against it that much stronger. So this leads us to the most important question of all, right? If we find the blockage, can we actually fix the problem? Can we reverse the cognitive decline? This is where our investigation takes a very interesting and pretty unexpected turn.
It seems totally logical, doesn't it? If a blocked pipe is causing the problem, you just unblock the pipe. Surgeons can go in, they can clean out the plaque, they can put in a stent to open the artery up. But the real question is, does restoring the flow also restore the mind?
And here is the twist. The evidence is completely all over the place. For every study you find that shows people get better, there's another one that shows no change at all, or sometimes even a slight decline. There's just no clear-cut answer, and it's a huge debate among experts right now.
So on one hand, there is real hope. Some studies do find that after reopening the artery, patients see real improvements, especially with things like memory and executive function. The idea is that if the brain cells were just starving, but not actually dead, getting that blood flow back can bring them back online. If you catch it early enough, the damage might actually be reversible.
But, on the other hand, many high-quality studies find no benefit at all. The short-term brain fog from anesthesia and surgery can make the results messy, and it might just be that the only people who really benefit are the ones who were proven to be suffering from that flow failure we talked about. For everybody else, the damage might already be done.
So, after looking at all this evidence, what's the verdict? What can we say for sure? And what's the next step in solving this medical mystery?
Here's what you really need to take away from all this. First, the link is real. It's significant. Second, that brain starvation theory seems to be the most likely culprit, and this leads to a critical insight. Maybe the important thing isn't just having a blockage, but proving that blockage is actively restricting blood flow. And finally, while the link is clear, the case for using surgery to fix the thinking problems, well, that's still unproven.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. Perhaps the future of fighting this kind of cognitive decline isn't just about finding blockages anymore, but about actually measuring the blood flow inside the brain itself. Could that be the real key to figuring out who's truly at risk, who needs treatment, and maybe, just maybe, a whole new way to protect our minds as we get older?